disabled. I couldn't see my children, much like every other parent. And I'm in one room teaching all day, stuck at the computer, seeing what children are going through on the other side. And I had this, I think we're all dying. And I didn't know what to do. And all night I was thinking about what would my parents do. Now my parents and grandparents had founded Pakistan at a time when they moved and left everything, that 2 million people moving to Pakistan because of religious freedom. What did they go through? And so I contemplated, and I had a dream that my mother's saying, look to your grandparents, look to your parents, what did they do in these times? And in that, I said, well, they returned to God. They relied on God to find them hope. And so in my stupor, I wrote a book, and it was all based on the sayings that my mother had said about the great Sufis in Islam, when they were helping people go through these trials, believe in God. And so I was very, very, I would say, encouraged to find that all of the things that they had said, I put them in this compilation, and then I sent them to my my cousins and nieces and my daughters, who I believe, I'm sure the world is going through, our kids are losing faith because they see religion as a divisive force. And I said, read these. And a lot of them said, this makes sense. It also helped them. So I believe that faith is fundamental in helping us live a better life, happier life. If you are happy internally, even for pain, as we have pain, we meditate and we use the names of God in Islam. We say, your body has to be taken care of. We have duties to our body. And what is that? Nourishing it with knowledge, nourishing it with food and water and relationships. Hukukul ibad is also a very important tenet of Islam, which is once you nourish yourself and you do what is dutiful to God, you pray, you have to work with the community. People have rights, and they are considered more important to God than rights, like prayers. And so during COVID, I led my community to give mass at churches and synagogues to seniors, and I worked with the rabbis to give halal food to seniors that were isolated during COVID. And I can tell you, the women that I engaged in that program, they've come out stronger. So even though I was attacked after speaking at an Israeli rally, these were the women who had faith that once we stick together, we're all following God, that we will rise as better community, as better human beings, and as better Muslims.
You found this data affirming. I found the same thing. Anila and I just met, but we share a love of faith. I lost my father in the past month. We share a love of family, and you see the well-being defined by those commonalities. Rabbi, what do you find in your faith tradition, and as you look at this topic, I know you've been deeply engaged in mental health, wellness, well-being. What would you say about these findings?
I find them affirming. They actually reflect what I see in community, which is quite extraordinary. I travel around the world, I meet with young people, I meet with faith leaders, and we all seem to be finding the same challenges. I don't know about you, but I looked at sometimes at the synagogue and it kind of looks a little like the tables here. Everybody's kind of sitting in the back. I belong to a group of rabbis who run, we're a fundraising group called the Rabbis in the Back Row. We're not quite sure we want to sit at the front table yet. But the reality is that when we look at our synagogues, we look at our churches, we look at our mosques, and we see attendance, it kind of feels a little scary, because how are we going to fill those seats? How are we going to get involved? And I have 4 stepchildren, and I can tell you, if I ask them if they feel religiously connected, and they say, well, I feel connected to peoplehood, but I feel spiritually connected to my friends, to my community, and to some divine expression. And I think that's part of the challenge, is understanding what is religiosity and religious practice and belief, and what is spiritual practice. And I remember as a kid trying to explain what spirituality meant to my parents, who are more traditional Jews, and they looked at me and they're like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, well, it's kind of like you throw spaghetti at the wall and you see what sticks. Because when you start to experiment with your religious practice, you start to find what works. It's kind of like when the cantor in the synagogue is singing and they say the prayer and they say it with this tune, and you go, oh, that's not the tune. The tune I grew up with is the tune, as if it came from Mount Sinai itself. And that becomes part of the practice. And how do we actually find this? And how do we find common language? Because I think oftentimes the big challenge is finding adults being able to engage with young people. And I really look forward to the next iteration of this study, as it goes forward, I hope, that will include the voices of children. Because I think their experience is different from ours. And I think it's important and valuable to understand how they think and how they feel and how they believe, how they practice, and how they connect with not just with God, but with community. In Judaism, we talk about, there's God, there's Torah, and there's Israel, meaning the divine Torah, which is the religious practice, and then there's peoplehood. And the reality is that is true in all things. We all have our own relationship with the divine. But our relationship with one another is fundamental. It has to exist. And we have to find the common ground. And that also means finding common language. Understanding what you believe and what I believe, and finding the common threads. Because, and I said this before, I think I've said it 12 times this morning,